Emma stared at the legal documents spread across her father's mahogany desk, the words blurring through her tears: bankruptcy, foreclosure, marriage contract. The three phrases that would define the end of her old life and the beginning of something unimaginable. "You have 24 hours to decide," her father said, his voice hollow with defeat. Richard Morrison had built his publishing empire from nothing, but a series of bad investments and the economic downturn had brought everything crashing down. "Alexander Kane is willing to pay off all our debts and save the company, but only if you agree to marry him." Emma's hands trembled as she picked up the photograph of the man who held her future in his hands. Alexander Kane, 35, CEO of Kane Industries, worth over $2 billion. His steel-grey eyes seemed to pierce through the camera lens, and his sharp jawline spoke of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "Why me?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. Kane had been clear about his requirements: a young, educated wife from a respectable family to enhance his public image. A business transaction disguised as matrimony. Her father couldn't meet her eyes. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. Everything has been arranged." Emma closed her eyes, thinking of her younger brother's medical bills, her mother's fragile health, the 100 employees who would lose their jobs if Morrison Publishing collapsed. The weight of their futures pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. At 22, she had dreamed of falling in love, of choosing her own path. Instead, she was being sold to the highest bidder, her life reduced to a line item in a corporate acquisition. "I need time to think," she said, knowing she had no real choice at all. The Kane Industries building towered over downtown like a glass and steel monument to power. Emma's heels clicked against the marble floor as she was escorted to the top floor, each step taking her closer to the man who would become her husband in 13 days. Alexander Kane's office was a study in controlled luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, while expensive artwork adorned the walls. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, surveying his domain like a king overlooking his kingdom. "Miss Morrison," he said without turning around. His voice was deep, cultured, with an undertone of absolute authority. "I trust you've made your decision." Emma straightened her spine, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. "I have conditions." Now he turned, one dark eyebrow raised in what might have been amusement. Up close, he was even more imposing than his photographs suggested. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. "Conditions," he repeated, as if the word was foreign to him. "My family's company remains independent. You pay the debts, but my father retains control of day-to-day operations." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "And this marriage has a 5-year term. After that, we divorce amicably." Alexander studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She could practically see him calculating, weighing the costs and benefits like any other business decision. "Agreed," he said finally. "But understand this, Miss Morrison. While we're married, you'll fulfill all the duties of a wife: public appearances, social functions, living arrangements. You'll be Mrs. Kane in every way that matters to the outside world." Emma nodded, though her stomach churned at the implications. "And in private?" His smile was cold as winter. "In private, we'll be exactly what we are, strangers bound by a contract." The wedding preparations moved with military precision, orchestrated by Alexander's team of assistants and planners. Emma felt like a doll being dressed and positioned for someone else's pleasure, her own preferences dismissed or ignored entirely. The dress fitting took place in an exclusive boutique that had been closed to other customers for the day. The gown was beautiful, ivory silk with delicate beadwork and a cathedral train, but it felt like a costume for a role she never auditioned for. "You look stunning," the designer gushed, but Emma saw only a stranger in the mirror. The woman reflected back at her looked older, more sophisticated, but her eyes held a sadness that no amount of makeup could conceal. Her mother fussed over the details, grateful beyond words for Alexander's intervention, but worried about her daughter's obvious unhappiness. "He seems like a good man," she said hopefully, adjusting Emma's veil. "Perhaps in time." Emma didn't respond. She had researched Alexander Kane extensively, reading every article, every interview. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly without sentiment when it came to business. His previous relationships had been brief, strategic affairs with socialites and actresses who understood the temporary nature of his attention. The prenuptial agreement had arrived that morning, 47 pages of legal language that essentially stated she would leave the marriage with exactly what she brought to it: nothing. She signed it without reading every clause, knowing that fighting would be pointless. Her friends from college called constantly, excited about the wedding, envious of her fairy tale romance. If only they knew the truth. This wasn't Cinderella finding her prince. It was a business merger with her as the primary asset being acquired. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday at the Cathedral of St. Matthew, followed by a reception at the Metropolitan Club. 300 guests, most of whom she'd never met, would witness her transformation from Emma Morrison to Mrs. Alexander Kane. 5 more days of freedom remained. Emma woke on her wedding day to grey skies and the distant rumble of thunder. Even the weather seemed to reflect her mood as she went through the motions of preparing for the most important day of her life and the day she dreaded most. The bridal suite at the Plaza Hotel buzzed with activity. Hairstylists, makeup artists, and photographers moved around her like worker bees, transforming her into the perfect bride for a man she barely knew. Her reflection showed a woman of ethereal beauty, but Emma felt hollow inside, as if all her emotions had been carefully painted over. Her father appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his morning coat, but looking older than his 58 years. The stress of the past months had taken its toll, adding lines to his face and silver to his hair. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, though they both knew it was too late for second thoughts. The guests were already arriving at the cathedral, the contracts had been signed, and the money had changed hands. "Yes, I do," Emma replied, accepting the bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. "We both know that." The ride to the cathedral passed in a blur of city streets and curious onlookers. News of the Kane-Morrison wedding had made the society pages, with speculation about the speed of the courtship and the obvious business advantages for both families. At the cathedral doors, Emma paused. Through the massive oak portals lay her future, a life of luxury and privilege, but also one of emotional exile. She thought of running, of disappearing into the crowd and starting over somewhere far away. But the thought of her family's ruin kept her feet moving forward. The organ began to play, and Emma took her father's arm. 300 faces turned toward her as she began the longest walk of her life, toward a man who saw her as nothing more than a beautiful acquisition. Alexander waited at the altar, imposing in his black tailcoat, his expression unreadable as always. The cathedral's soaring arches and stained glass windows created an atmosphere of ancient solemnity. But Emma felt like an actress performing in a play she'd never rehearsed. The priest's words washed over her as she stood beside Alexander, acutely aware of his presence and the hundreds of eyes watching their every move. When it came time for the vows, Alexander's voice was steady and clear, each word precisely enunciated as if he were reading from a business contract, rather than pledging his life to another person. His hands were warm when he slipped the platinum band onto her finger, but his touch was impersonal, clinical. Emma's own voice nearly failed her when she repeated the sacred words, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was promising to love a man who had explicitly told her their marriage would be loveless. The ring he placed on her finger was exquisite, a 5-carat diamond surrounded by smaller stones, probably worth more than most people's houses. It felt heavy, like a beautiful shackle binding her to her new reality. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander's kiss was brief and formal, his lips barely brushing hers. The congregation erupted in applause, but Emma felt nothing except a profound sense of loss for the life she was leaving behind. As they walked back down the aisle together, Alexander's hand rested possessively on her arm. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect couple, the powerful billionaire and his beautiful young bride. Only Emma knew that beneath the surface lay a transaction as cold and calculated as any other business deal Alexander had ever made. The photographer captured their exit from the cathedral, rice and rose petals falling around them like confetti. Emma smiled for the cameras, playing her part perfectly, while inside she mourned the death of her dreams. The Metropolitan Club had been transformed into a wonderland of white roses, crystal chandeliers, and candlelight. Emma moved through the reception like a ghost at her own funeral, accepting congratulations from strangers and distant relatives who spoke of her good fortune in marrying Alexander Kane. The wedding cake was a towering confection of 7 tiers, decorated with sugar flowers so realistic they looked fresh-picked. When it came time to cut the first slice, Alexander's hand covered hers on the knife handle, his touch sending an unexpected shiver through her. For a moment their eyes met, and she thought she saw something flicker in his grey gaze, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. During the father-daughter dance, her dad whispered apologies in her ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. If there had been any other way..." Emma forced a smile for the watching guests. "It's done now, Dad. We move forward." When Alexander claimed her for their first dance as husband and wife, Emma was surprised by his grace. He moved with the confidence of a man who had been trained in all the social graces expected of his class, leading her through a waltz as if they had danced together 100 times before. "You're playing your part well," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "I'm a quick learner," she replied, maintaining her smile for the cameras that flashed around them. The evening wore on, with speeches from business associates and family friends, each toast emphasizing the perfect match between the Kane and Morrison families. Emma drank champagne and smiled until her face ached, all while counting the minutes until she could escape. As the last guests departed, Emma realized that the real performance was just beginning. Tonight, she would go home with her husband, a stranger who now had legal claim to her life. The limousine waited outside, ready to carry them to their new life together. Alexander's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building he owned in the Upper East Side. As the private elevator rose silently upward, Emma felt her stomach drop with each passing floor. The wedding dress that had felt so beautiful that morning now seemed like an elaborate costume she couldn't wait to remove. The elevator opened directly into the foyer of the penthouse, revealing an interior that was breathtaking in its sophisticated elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, while museum-quality artwork adorned the walls. Everything was perfectly appointed, from the Italian marble floors to the custom furniture that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. "The master suite is on the 3rd floor," Alexander said, his tone businesslike as he gave her a brief tour. "You'll have the guest suite on the 2nd floor. It has its own sitting room and bathroom, so you'll have complete privacy." Emma nodded, relief flooding through her at the confirmation that they wouldn't be sharing a bedroom. The guest suite, when he showed it to her, was larger than her entire apartment had been, decorated in soft blues and creams with a king-sized bed that looked like something from a luxury hotel. "Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, will help you settle in," Alexander continued. "She's been with me for 5 years and is completely discreet. There's also a driver, Marcus, who will be at your disposal whenever you need transportation." An elderly Asian woman appeared as if summoned, her kind face creased with a welcoming smile. "Mrs. Kane," she said warmly, "it's such a pleasure to meet you. I've prepared some tea and light refreshments if you're hungry." The use of her new name felt strange, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. Emma thanked Mrs. Chen and accepted the offer of tea, grateful for any excuse to delay being alone with her new husband. Alexander checked his watch, a platinum Patek Philippe that probably cost more than a car. "I have some calls to make. We'll discuss the household arrangements tomorrow." With that, he disappeared up the stairs to his own floor, leaving Emma alone with the housekeeper and the overwhelming reality of her new life. Emma sat in her new bedroom, still wearing her wedding dress, staring out at the glittering cityscape below. The champagne from the reception had worn off, leaving her with a headache and a crushing sense of isolation. In the space of one day, she had gone from Emma Morrison, struggling recent graduate, to Mrs. Alexander Kane, billionaire's wife, and she had never felt more alone. Mrs. Chen had helped her out of the elaborate gown and hung it carefully in the walk-in closet that was larger than her old bedroom. The housekeeper had been kind but professional, clearly understanding the unusual nature of the marriage without needing explanation. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Chen with more tea. Instead, Alexander appeared in the doorway, having changed from his formal wear into dark slacks and a white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He looked younger somehow, less intimidating without the armor of his business suit. "I wanted to check that you have everything you need," he said, remaining in the doorway as if crossing the threshold would violate some unspoken boundary. "I'm fine, thank you." Emma pulled her silk robe tighter around herself, suddenly conscious of how little she was wearing beneath it. Alexander studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said finally, "but I want you to understand that I'll honor our agreement. You'll be treated with respect in this house, and your privacy will be maintained." There was something in his tone that made Emma look at him more closely. For just a moment, the mask of cold control slipped, and she caught a glimpse of something that might have been loneliness in his grey eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded curtly and turned to leave, then paused. "Emma," he said, using her first name for the first time since the ceremony. "What you did today, marrying me to save your family, it took courage." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the echo of unexpected kindness in his voice. The first weeks of marriage fell into a pattern that was both comfortable and strange. Alexander left for the office before Emma woke, returning late in the evening when she was often already in her room. They were like polite strangers sharing an elegant hotel, crossing paths occasionally but maintaining careful distance. Emma spent her days exploring the city, visiting museums and galleries, trying to find her place in this new world. The credit card Alexander had given her had no limit, but she found herself reluctant to use it for anything beyond necessities. Spending his money felt too much like accepting charity. Mrs. Chen became her closest companion, the older woman's warm presence a comfort in the vast, quiet penthouse. Over morning tea, she would share stories of her own family and gently probe about Emma's adjustment to married life. "Mr. Kane is a good man," she said one morning as they sat in the breakfast nook overlooking Central Park. "He works too hard, doesn't take care of himself properly. Maybe now that he has a wife." Emma didn't know how to explain that she wasn't really a wife in any meaningful sense. "We're still getting to know each other," she said diplomatically. The social obligations began almost immediately. Charity galas, business dinners, cultural events where Emma was expected to appear at Alexander's side, playing the role of the devoted new bride. She learned to navigate these events with grace, making small talk with society wives and business associates while Alexander conducted his affairs nearby. At these functions, she began to see a different side of her husband. He was charming when he chose to be, commanding respect and attention effortlessly. Women flirted with him openly, even knowing he was newly married, and Emma felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been jealousy. But at home, they remained strangers, their conversations limited to logistics and schedules. Emma began to wonder if this was how the next 5 years would pass, two people living parallel lives under the same roof, connected only by a legal document. 3 months into their marriage, Emma made a discovery that changed everything. She had been looking for a book in Alexander's study when she found the medical reports hidden in his desk drawer. The letterhead was from Sloan Kettering, and the diagnosis was stark and terrifying: early-stage pancreatic cancer. Her hands shook as she read the treatment recommendations, the survival statistics, the careful medical language that couldn't disguise the seriousness of his condition. The reports were dated 6 months ago, before their marriage, before the business deal that had brought them together. Suddenly, everything made sense. The rushed timeline, his insistence on marriage to a young woman from a good family, the 5-year term limit he had agreed to so readily. He wasn't planning a future, he was arranging his legacy. Emma sat in his leather chair, the reports scattered before her, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The man she had seen as a cold, calculating businessman was actually a frightened human being facing his own mortality. The marriage wasn't just about his public image. It was about not dying alone. That evening, she waited for him in the living room, the medical reports in her hands. When he came home and saw her sitting there with the papers, his face went completely white. "You had no right to go through my private papers," he said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "You're sick," Emma said simply. "How sick?" Alexander poured himself a scotch with hands that trembled slightly. "The doctors are optimistic, caught early, good treatment options. I have an excellent chance of full recovery." "But you didn't know that when you married me." He met her eyes then, and she saw the truth written in his expression. "No," he admitted, "I didn't." For the first time since their wedding day, Emma saw Alexander Kane not as a powerful billionaire, but as a man who was afraid. The revelation about Alexander's illness changed the dynamic between them in ways Emma hadn't expected. Instead of anger at his deception, she felt something closer to compassion. He had been facing the possibility of death alone, with no one to share his fear or provide comfort during treatment. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, as they sat in his study. The medical report spread between them like a bridge, finally connecting their separate worlds. Alexander stared into his Scotch glass. His usual composure cracked. "What would have been the point? You were already sacrificing enough for your family. I didn't want your pity as well." "It wouldn't have been pity," Emma said softly. "It would have been understanding." He looked up at her then, surprise flickering in his grey eyes. "You're not angry that I deceived you?" Emma considered the question carefully. "You're having surgery next week, aren't you? That's why you've been working such long hours trying to clear your schedule." Alexander nodded, clearly amazed that she had pieced together his carefully hidden plans. "I'm going with you," she said firmly. "That's not necessary. Mrs. Chen can—" "I'm your wife," Emma interrupted, the words carrying weight they had never held before. "Whatever the circumstances of our marriage, I'm not going to let you face this alone." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. "Emma, you don't understand what you're offering. The treatment will be difficult, and I may not be pleasant company." "I understand perfectly," she replied. "You married me because you were afraid of dying alone. Well, you're not alone anymore." For a long moment, they looked at each other across the desk, and Emma felt something fundamental change between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something real, something that went beyond their contractual arrangement. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly, and Emma heard a lifetime of loneliness in those two simple words. 6 months later, as Alexander recovered from his successful surgery and treatment, Emma finally understood what had truly happened on their wedding night. It hadn't been the dramatic confrontation or shocking revelation that the story's title suggested. It had been something far more profound and unexpected. On that first night as his wife, when Alexander had checked on her in her room, Emma had made a choice that would define their entire relationship. Instead of retreating into bitterness or resentment, she had chosen to see him as a human being, rather than just the man who had bought her freedom with his wealth. What shocked everyone, Emma realized as she sat beside Alexander's hospital bed during one of his treatment sessions, wasn't what I did on our wedding night. It was what I didn't do. Alexander, pale but alert, squeezed her hand. "What do you mean?" "I didn't hate you," she said simply. "Everyone expected me to be angry, resentful, maybe even vindictive. But I saw something in your eyes that night, loneliness that matched my own. I think that's when I decided to try to make this work, even before I knew about your illness." Their marriage had begun as a business transaction, but it had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Through the long nights of his treatment, the quiet conversations about their fears and dreams, the gradual building of trust and understanding, they had discovered that love could grow in the most unlikely circumstances. "I love you," Alexander said, the words coming easily now, though they had taken months to build up to. "I know that wasn't part of our original agreement, but I love you too," Emma interrupted, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "And that definitely wasn't in the contract." Outside the hospital window, the city sparkled in the afternoon sun. Full of possibilities they were only beginning to explore together. Their 5-year marriage contract had become irrelevant. They were building something that would last a lifetime. What had shocked everyone wasn't a dramatic gesture or rebellion. It was the quiet miracle of two lonely people finding love in the most unexpected place.